Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This is Somali TV coming to you live from Heritage STEM Academy. My guest today is Michael Abraham, who is a colleague and a co-teacher for 4 years with me, and he has an experience of teaching for 13 years. Michael Abraham is a dedicated Muslim who is engaged about the education of Muslim children, and as a result of that, he wrote a book, Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools, which he will talk more about that. And I will also ask him questions about parenting and how Muslim parents can get involved in the schools. Brother Michael, welcome to Somali TV.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Nice to be here. Happy to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Can you a little bit introduce yourself? I know you. You have been teaching in the teaching profession for 13 years, you wrote a book, and you have done so many things for the community. But I would like to speak more about yourself.
Yeah. Well, thanks. My name is Michael Abraham. I'm from the Twin Cities area here. My father is an Arab Christian, so a lot of people look at me and ask whether or not I'm Arab. So I am Arab, but I reverted to Islam in the year 2007. So at that time, really since then, I started working in programming in masajid, and especially the weekend schools, and working with youth, doing youth programming. This was even before I was in education.
Right.
And then I got into education in 2010. I actually began teaching in Saudi Arabia. So since that time, I've always known that Muslims, of course, value education very highly, but there's also somewhat this ambivalence or anxiety over what it means for the kids to grow up here.
Right.
So since I've been in the American public education system for 10 years, I actually recognized pretty early on that it was a place to educate people more about Islam and more about the authentic wants and needs of the Muslim community. I mean, as you know, public education has a really high emphasis on multiculturalism.
Right.
And over the past 20 years, most school districts in America, they've experienced a huge demographic shift with their student body. Like where I graduated in the south suburbs here in the Twin Cities, when I graduated in 2002, it was a 94% white district. Now it's only 58% white. A large part of that change is an influx of East African immigrants and immigrants from Muslim places. And we've certainly seen that throughout the Twin Cities as well as elsewhere in America. So, when you have the education system really talking about how we need to learn more about different cultures, our student body is changing, we have to learn about these families, and all this type of talk, you really can't be honest in that conversation when you're talking about Muslim populations of people if that type of learning is not going to involve educators learning about Islam. So things like training around racial equity, things around training for gender diversity, things around training for multiculturalism in general, that's been around a while for an education. But in writing my book and developing the training program that I did attached to it, Engaging Muslim Students in Public Schools, the focus of this program is really to make the non-Muslim educators focus on religion and learning really what it means to be Muslim. And when you ask schools about things they do for Muslim kids and accommodations, they'll say things related to holidays, related to Ramadan,
Right.
maybe for accommodating the daily prayers. Actually, lots of schools have problems with even with that. But, what my training program tries to do in my book and my consultancy with districts is really get to a deep level of understanding what it means psychologically to be a Muslim, how it affects someone's mentality, and the conundrum that Muslim youth are in the West, where Islam is supposed to affect your heart and mind in very large ways and how you carry yourself in your everyday life, but for all intents and purposes, when they go through the education, the public system, they get conditioned into a frame of mind where what they have to manifest is that being Muslim has no real part in how you interact with the society or how you discourse on issues. And the reason for that is because the teachers themselves and the people who control the environments that the kids are in, they don't know anything about it. And if you look at the way education works, any type of perspective that there is out there, it's not going to be brought into a classroom unless the teacher has it already. Because even if kids have that type of perspective in their background or in their family history, if they can't be confident that the teacher has some understanding of that background or that perspective, they won't bring it into the classroom. So there is actually room in public education to bring your perspective as a Muslim, to bring different religious perspectives into classroom discussions and lessons, but it just can't happen without the teachers knowing what those are. So my program is really about teaching about that directly.
Yeah, go ahead. Speaking of these programs, I know you have been doing a lot of training for
Yeah.
school districts in the state of Minnesota and also other states.
Yeah.
So what has the reaction been so far?
Yeah, very positive. So I just reach out to school districts constantly. I usually hold private trains that I invite people to. I'm doing more and more things in-house at certain districts and schools. So in 6 years, I've had over 1,000 educators take the training in the state of Minnesota, and that's represented every school district in the Twin Cities area, as well as St. Cloud, Faribault, Rochester, Owatonna, and Mankato as well. Not everyone from those districts, but at least some people from those districts doing the training. And overall, since COVID, doing it online and traveling a little bit, I've had over 2,000 people across the country take it across 15 states in total.
Okay. Okay, that's the essence of the book, training non-Muslim teachers. Okay, we don't see many Muslims are involved in the education system. As very few of them, like you and I, and you understand the policy. So when it comes to parenting, Muslim parents, especially East African immigrants like the Somalis and the Oromo people, the education system is completely different from what we had over there.
Right.
Just an example is, most teachers back home there in Somalia or in Ethiopia, elsewhere, mostly in Africa, they are considered as teachers and also parents. They play the role of parents. So they teach the kids and also they watch their behavior and their morals.
Yeah.
So how could they be more involved in Western schools like the ones in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, this phenomenon, I taught at a school that was all Latino students and Latino families for 3 years. It was very similar there. And I find that in the developing world in general, education tends to be very top-down. It's like the government and the Ministry of Education creates certain books. Those are handed to schools, and then the teachers are supposed to teach those books A to Z. So it's kind of like preset what education already is. So I mean, the first thing, parents just need to understand that traditionally, that's not what education is in America. The 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution actually prohibits the federal government from creating a national curriculum. So at its largest point, a school curriculum can only be developed at the state level. But really, it's more done at the local district level or even the individual school level. So parent participation in school and in the learning and in what is going on is almost just like expected in traditionally in American public schools. But the people who are going to have influence are going to be the people who take action on it. Right. Now, I know that for many families, it's maybe intimidating and it can feel difficult as far as time, as far as your own expertise and all that type of thing. This is part of why I created my resources and made my book, because Muslims actually really needed something like that, a comprehensive program that can just be handed off from parents to schools in order to educate them. Now, from there, something that schools can do, I mean, advocating in the school is a really straightforward thing. You just reach out directly. One of the worst things that people do when it comes to advocating for their kids in schools is they wait for someone to give them permission, or they wait for someone to present the opportunity. The people who really have impact and are effective, they're proactive themselves. They will just look up the contact information, they'll show up at the school, they'll send emails, and they just do it proactively. Now how do you do that well? Again, other groups of people, they've had books, they've had resources that they can refer the education system to become more educated on things like racial equity or different cultures. And what I tried to put together is a book and a training program that schools can be referred to so they can comprehensively be educated about Islam and what it means to be Muslim.
All right. So in terms of parent involvement, there are so many challenges with East African immigrant parents, and that's one of the reasons that they trust teachers and school administrators to do most of the work for them. This challenge is because parents, most of them, they are recently arrived and they work during the day or maybe multiple jobs at a time, and they don't have time for school or time to follow up with teachers. So in this case, then, what is the best strategy to deal with those kind of challenges?
Yeah, it seems to be different for every family. One thing I will tell people to do, have a YouTube channel, Abraham Education, and I'm on Instagram as well. Then go to my website, abrahameducation.com, or email me, because I have actually helped some families communicate with their schools, because sometimes there's an education gap in just over whatever particular issue parents have. Now, I know with a lot of parents, they're very concerned about what kids might be learning about in school these days pertaining to certain topics. Here in the state of Minnesota, parents have a right to review the learning curriculum of their kid. And the school is actually required by state law to have a process by which parents can see that. Now, how do you assert that right? you simply contact the school and let them know you want to assert it, and that you want to review the kid's curriculum. And then they're supposed to put the process in place for you.
Right.
You might need knowledge of the specific law or this type of thing to reference, but that's all that knowledge can be have. I know lots of parents, they have questions over special programming, like special education and ESL services. I've worked a lot in ESL services here in Minneapolis Public Schools as a coordinator. Parents have options with that type of thing. Like a lot of times I see parents, they have more of an impression that they are mandated to have their kids signed up for something or something that the school might recommend, but they actually have a lot of rights to control over the kids' direction and education. And it's really just a matter of asserting it and reaching out directly and communicating.
All right. When it comes to cultural difference between East African or Muslim kids and the general population in America, there's a lot of cultural differences. And the gender issue, you talk about multiculturalism, comes on top all the time of those Muslims. So
Correct.
How can they handle this kind of conundrum, this kind of situations when it arises?
Specifically with gender or just multiculturalism issues in general?
Multiculturalism in general. Everything.
Yeah, again, everything comes back to educating people. I mean, this is the thing people have to get their minds around. Like, yes, the people in public education are experts in certain things in certain areas.
Right.
And they might be experts in managing children and getting them to follow directions and listen to instructions, type of stuff. But in a multicultural environment like we are in, you really have to take it as a job to educate other people. And people will steer your kids in directions that you might not want them to go if you don't take it upon yourself to educate them. So really, the public education system is something that has to be seen by Muslims as, yes, it might be a place where you send their kids to get a certain education, but it also has to be a place where, as a community, we are participating in it to educate others. And we have a problem. It's hard being Muslim in America just in general because of the lack of knowledge that people have about Islam in general. And we make all our efforts, we might make efforts on social media or efforts in the masajid, doing conferences to try to educate people, but the reach of all of that is limited. It's limited to people who have a self-interest in learning about Islam, and they seek it out for some reason. So how do we start educating people who maybe don't have that self-interest? Well, public school educators who educate Muslim kids, they have a professional interest in learning about Islam because they know how well it relates to their Muslim kids. They just don't know about it. And then they're being told all these things. Even they're required by the state to learn about multiculturalism. So this is an avenue that we need to take advantage of for educating the society, really.
So most teachers, when they want to learn something about Muslims or any culture, they turn to Google. Is that a good source to get information?
Well, what do you think?
For me, probably not.
Yeah,
Anybody can.
Honestly, I'm not sure it's as bad as it used to be. It used to be you'd search on Google, you get all kinds of Islamophobic stuff. I'm not sure it's as bad as it used to be. However, even that type of education, like if you read the standard Wikipedia article about Islam or this type of thing, or even a trade paperback by a Western academic like John Esposito who writes about Islam, they're going to teach about it in this general way, this academic way that relates it to other religions or this type of thing. But what teachers really need to know about it, they need to know about it more on the everyday level of how it relates to everyday things with their kids. They need to know how Muslims go to the bathroom. Yes. They need to know things like that. They need to know why Muslims are specific about how they do things like go to the bathroom. They need to know all the rules involved with the prayer. They need to understand the first pillar really well and things you should and should not ask the kids to do with their assignments because sometimes the teachers have the kids do assignments that involve shirk.
Yes.
That involve violating the first pillar of Islam. And if you don't know about it, you just don't know about it. And they need resources that relate to their learning to that specific context of the professional interest that they have. And it's actually a beautiful thing because, again, it's something that it actually takes the politics out of it. I mean, that is a big problem any non-Muslim has. Whether they're sincere or not, they go trying to learn about Islam. It's going to be clouded with political rhetoric. Mm-hmm. But in this context of relating everything to our kids and relating to us on an everyday level, and in the more professional environment of professional development in education, it gives you the chance to educate people at length a little bit. Every teacher in America, before they get their, or not America, in Minnesota, but it's the similar in many states, they have to get their license renewed every 5 years. They have to do 150 hours of continuing education credits to get that relicense. The state of Minnesota requires that at minimum 8 of those hours have to be in multiculturalism, and that they have actually explicitly stipulated now that learning about religious diversity is an area in which that multiculturalism should be done. So, it's better than just this kind of media interaction people might consume, whether it's the mainstream media or social media or anything you search online, because when you have the context of reading a book or professional development, you can have people sit and listen and go through a learning continuum that's been put together for a comprehensive reason. And they can learn about things on a deeper level and an actual level.
All right. And this might be a question for policymakers or policy implementers. This kind of cultural training, about Muslim kids, for example, or culture in general. Sometimes the trainers, the people who are training the teachers, they are not Muslims themselves.
I know.
They have limited information.
I know.
So what can be done about that?
Yeah, this is, it's a challenge for Muslims that we haven't had more people in education. Right. That's a reality that comes down to it. Most Muslim communities, they prioritize medicine and engineering, and that's fine. Maybe accounting, IT. Many of the young brothers get involved in IT these days. Right. Those are all nice fields. We tend to look at the money first in the field that we're going to get into, and I understand there's reasons for that. But the fact is we need more people in education, so we have more people to do this, because some of this work actually should have been done a long time ago. And as you're saying, there's actually been a demand within public education, especially for people to learn about Islam and learn about Muslims for a while, ever since these kids have come into the system. Well, when there's a demand for something, someone is going to meet it.
Right.
So it can either be us or it can be someone else.
Yeah, I know this is a long conversation, and we will have so many other sessions as well. What's your concluding word for today's session and the things that we talk about?
Well, I just really want to thank you and thank Somali Minnesota TV for giving me the chance to talk about this. And to parents, I just want to say, just don't be afraid. Like the school system owes you, actually. Correct. Especially here in Minnesota. I've actually run the numbers. I have some of them laid out in my book. Just about every school district in the Twin Cities, and ones even outside the Twin Cities in Minnesota, had Somali immigrants not come to this state over the past 20, 25 years, all of these school districts would have had massive budget cuts. They would have had school closures, because their overall numbers of students have stayed the same for the most part. But the demographics have changed, where they have many less white students and more immigrant students, and a huge chunk of that is East African students. So these education professionals, they actually owe their jobs and their institutions to the existence of your family and your child in those places. So don't be afraid to demand things. Don't be afraid to insist that they become educated about who we really are as Muslims and what's important to us, and that they take part in having the same priorities as we do in raising and nurturing our children, because they spend so much time with them, so inevitably they have a huge role in it.
Thank you, Michael. And this will not be our last show. We will come and host you many times in the future.
Inshallah, Jazakallah. Thank you so much.
That concludes our program today about parenting and teaching Muslim kids in American schools. Our guest today was Brother Michael Abraham, who is a teacher at Heritage STEM Academy of Minneapolis Public Schools. And the show was coming to you live from Heritage STEM Academy. Until we meet next time, we leave you fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.